How
How
are
are you?
you?
I feel like I haven't seen you in a while. I don't know. It feels like it's been a long time.
Well, you've been on one of your weekly public holidays in the US, haven't you, this week? So, what was it this week?
It
The
was
first
Labor Day.
first Monday of the weekday, and so you took it off?
You know what? You guys have plenty of holidays. I think we work more than at least the average European worker. I mean, isn't it the big joke how hard Americans work and how little we actually get accomplished? I mean,
Yeah, pretty much. That is true. I was going to say, oh my God, you're insulting pretty much all our members in Belgium, all our listeners in Belgium by with
no,
that
we're
comment.
jealous
But
of them. We're jealous of them, how efficient, everyone else seems to be while taking siestas. I mean, we just
and where are you right now? Because it does look, your prison
yeah. No,
esque.
I'm not in a prison. I'm in Alexandria, Virginia. I'm at a client's office. We're going to be doing a board meeting, an 18-month check-in on a strategic plan this afternoon. So
Oh,
here on site in the field and excited to tackle the chaos of another country's political landscape versus our own chaos here in the good old US of A. So you brought a friend, which I'm excited about, so I don't have to listen to you and your take on everything the whole time. But excited to have Richard Lambert here. Good morning, Richard. Good afternoon. Good evening. Whatever it may be for you.
Good afternoon. That sounds like the whole day's just disappeared for you.
It pretty much has. I have no idea. Andrew and I are on such different time zones. When we're traveling, when we're not traveling, we just if it's daylight outside, we say good day.
yeah.
But we're not Australian, so wait a minute. We don't say good day. But Richard is a long-standing experience. I mean, he's one of the gurus,
Hmm.
former trade association executive, and 3 organizations over 20 years. I mean, that's a good run. I mean, those are unheard of. 3 associations in 20 years. You may not see that much anymore. But now a fellow consultant with a research consultancy, providing his knowledge and expertise. And we're going to dive into something again that I might want to just take a back seat for, but you guys are going to give us all a lesson in the political landscape, and I'm guessing then its impact on the nonprofit space, the membership association space in the good old UK.
Yes, we are. Sorry. Yes, I was, I always end up doing this. I always end up just watching you on the screen like I'm just watching Netflix, and I forget that I'm part of the recording.
All right, yeah. So this is you. I'm handing you.
Yes, we are.
Tell
We
us what's
are.
going on. How are things?
Well,
How's Brexit going? I mean, I
oh
don't
no, no,
know.
no, no. We're not talking about Brexit. We're not doing
Oh,
Brexit. We're definitely not
okay.
doing that, are we, Richard? We're
Somebody
we're
once said,
over that.
not the B word.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. The B word. I love it.
So but we are in a different landscape, a changed landscape in political terms in the UK.
That's right. This
We
was a
had
big summer, big election, big summer for
Yeah,
you
we had a
guys.
big election in July this year. We had a change of government, first time in 14 years. And I think the trade association world, the membership world, is sort of coming to terms with, well, what does engagement look like with a government that is obviously feeling confident and buoyed by its success, but actually is now sitting on a 3-digit majority in the House of Commons in the Westminster Parliament in London. So, it's a very different political landscape to what we've been used to, as I say, for the last 14 years. But Richard, I am delighted to say, is like always my go-to person when it comes to political matters, but in terms of lobbying and campaigning and engaging with government, because you have such a good track record of doing so, not least because you used to work in the UK Parliament. That is right. You did used to work in the
Ooh.
UK Parliament, didn't you?
I did. When I left university, I got a job as a civil servant in the House of Commons. If I'd stayed there and been very good and worked hard, I would have could have ended up as one of those 3 people sitting in front of the speaker with the
Oh
wigs
yeah, yeah.
gowns.
Uh-huh.
But I left after about 10 years. But I spent time working on the select committees, working on the passage of legislation through Parliament, working in the office that keeps the record, and working in the part of the administrative service that supported MPs and peers when they went into international parliamentary assemblies. So, yeah, I spent a lot of time. Yeah, I've got very immersed in how Parliament works, how government works, and that's what I took then into my work in associations. And I started off in associations as a policy analyst and working on the advocacy and representative side.
So I have a question. Am I allowed to ask questions?
Yeah, go for it. Throw them in. Throw them in.
So I'm dusting off my political science degree, but more so in terms of this environment with such a dramatic majority.
Oh, I think
Is the
Elisa's...
government less?
Oh,
Oh, am
sorry,
I okay?
Lisa, you completely froze. Well, you did for me. The Wi-Fi in the prison that you're at, it isn't very good. So you might want to go on, pose that
Oh.
question again. Go for it.
Okay, sorry. I'm just wondering, you said that it was such a dramatic majority. Does that mean the government isn't going to be interested in or have necessity for the impact or the input of industry?
No, on the contrary, I think industry, it's always got the government always wants to understand what is going on in the wider country and in industry in particular. You go back 40, 50 years, the UK government had a huge network of information gathering. And then they would find a lot of way, they would bring all that information into the civil service and they would feed it up through the civil service machine to the senior civil servants, the ministers, who then made all the decisions. But over the course of the 1980s and the 1990s, that was all dismantled as the Thatcher government tried to what they said, shrink the size of the state, shrink the size of the government machine, and focus down. So what happens now is, in the government, there will be one, maybe two people focusing on an industry. But actually, these days they may be focusing on two or three. So in my last job, the civil servants who we were dealing with most directly in the Department for Business and Trade, they were responsible for the personal care sector, which is hairdressing, beauty, all that kind of thing, but also for retail. They're big sectors.
Yeah.
So,
my God,
Wow,
retail.
that's two very different ends of the spectrum.
So what they really want is good information from the outside, so they understand what's going on, what's happening in that sector now, what are the issues, what are the concerns, what's the actual data. If you can give them business data, if you can give them statistics that they can rely on about hard economic facts as well as sentiment and attitudes, that is invaluable to them. They know you set the ground for having a wider conversation about what the implications of what government is or indeed is not doing is going to mean for your sector. So just because you've got a huge majority in Parliament, it means that it is much easier to pass the legislation that you want as a government, because
much more important to get your industry's perspective into government, because whatever they then decide on is going to go without challenge.
Yeah, this is the big shift in that if you've got a government with a relatively small majority, so we had the biggest change, like example, this came in 1997 when the previous Labour government was first elected. The Conservatives between 92 and 97 had a majority of 21. Effectively, that meant that if you persuaded 12 Conservative MPs either not to vote for the government or to vote against the government, you had the government in a bind because you could potentially defeat them.
Yeah.
So they had to negotiate with you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then you get a government with a 150 plus majority. Even if you could get 40 of those MPs to refuse to support the government still knows it's got another 110, 120 majority.
Right.
So the chance of overturning something in Parliament is very rare. What you've got to do is then try and work on the government machine to actually make sure that you get that you persuade the ministers and civil before, when
Right.
the decision is taken, it's taken in your favor.
When they're forming the idea at the ideation stage versus the
Abs-
legislative stage. Okay.
Or even I take it one step back. Yes, at the ideation, when they're still thinking about what the policy should be. Now, they will usually they will come in with a manifesto. So often there are certain areas they will have thought about quite deeply. So you'll know. And in the manifesto was published before the election. Before the manifesto was published, over the previous 6 months, the Labour Party published some really detailed policy papers. And if anyone wants to know,
Wait a minute, does your government actually, do they stick to their promises?
Oh yeah.
What?
Well, quite a lot. In fact, at the moment, I am sitting here, I'm ticking off the things that they've said they do. And actually, people have said, I've heard people say, well, where did that come from? I said, it was in that one. It was in that policy paper. It was in that policy paper. Particularly in the early stages when they're going full pelt, this is why we elected, this is what people want us to do, we are going to implement it. And it does come back to bite them, because if people will say, well, hang on, that was a manifesto commitment, when's that happening? Or they will say, what are you doing that for? Because that wasn't in your manifesto. You've not got a mandate to do that.
The double-edged sword of accountability. I mean, yikes.
Manifestos in the UK election are much more of a sort of a setting out of this is what we are going to do than perhaps the party platforms are in America. The party platforms almost seem to be a follow-on, because with party manifestos in the UK, it's very much this is what it's all, in some cases it's almost viewed like a contract. And
from an association's perspective, that arguably makes life a wee bit easier, because you've got a roadmap, if you like, in terms of you understand what you better understand, or you're not second guessing the policy environment or the policy decisions that are just going to appear arguably apropos of nothing. But I think though, you mentioned, the machine of government, the system of government, and I think one thing that people often fail to appreciate is the role of the civil service in this piece, and that actually, I mean, we all, the number of times we get invited to conferences or receptions or, events where, we're being invited because the minister is coming, or, there's this junior minister for this portfolio. And I think obviously, they're obviously, they're the ultimate decision makers. But I often am perplexed as to why not more is made of the relationship with the machine of government, which is basically, the civil service. I can't ever quite get my head around why. Well, I do understand why people get excited about, the minister, and not excited about the civil service. But the reality is that's where, the influence.
Yeah.
The influence is seeded in the relationships that you generate with your contemporaries in the civil service. And I think the more that associations can be doing to nurture those relationships, even though, as you say, these days there don't seem to be that many relationships that we can necessarily nurture when some poor so-and-so has got portfolio responsibility for something as large as the entire retail industry and plus other sectors. But I think there's a lot of mileage that can be brought out of, cultivating those relationships. And I just don't think we're capitalizing on them enough. Is that do you see that?
I absolutely, always. So we have what they call the sponsoring department, the department that is responsible for your particular sector of the economy. Most of my time here, it's been either the department for trade and industry, business trade. It's gone through lots of different names in the UK, or for housing and the environment. And you cultivate the relationships with the people in the posts. You cultivate relationships with people, but you're also cultivating it with that section of the civil service as well. Because as with all, people will move around. Nobody stays anywhere in one bit of the civil service for longer than about 5 years. And these days it can be less. But what you're trying to do is establish yourself and your organisation as a credible partner and a credible interlocutor, so that they know that they can come to you and you will give them reliable information, you'll give them good insight. And if they ask you something in confidence, it will stay in confidence. And so you're not just talking to the individuals, you're actually talking to the organization, so that it becomes part of the folk memory. So that when one person moves on from the job, when they do the handover, they will say, you can go, you know, if you need to find out about this, you go to this organization. They can be relied upon. I'm almost certain that they will say, be wary of that one. They are less, their information is not as good. Be wary of that one. They will start to talk to people about what you tell them, however confidential. And so you build up that relationship. Ministers, you know, as the in the words of the satirical sitcom Yes Minister, Once Upon a Time, the Prime Minister giveth and the Prime Minister taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Prime Minister. Ministers come and go. We have had 24 housing ministers since 1997. The average length of time they spend in the job is just under a year.
Okay.
Now,
okay.
And so that's just to give you one example. There are other examples across government. So with that speed of turnover, you know, you don't expect to build a relationship with that minister while they're in post, because
they won't be there.
Just don't have the time to. Unless you were working on a particularly intensive piece of legislation which was highly politically charged and they needed your help at the time, or you were likely to be a major blockage at the time. So what you really want to do, what I try and say is, advocacy representation is not about stunts and events and high-profile meetings. It's the constant back and forth dialogue between you as a sector representative and government, to try and get government to understand your position and understand how they can help you be more successful as a sector, and how you can help them achieve what they want as a government. And it's always that two-sided approach.
You think, though, sorry, Elisa, sorry, I'm just going to follow on and say, you know, one of the things I was going to say is, do you think that perhaps, though, you know, given your background, you know, you were a civil servant, you worked in the parliamentary system. Do you think that, you know, because you understand it, you're not intimidated by it? But I would argue, you know, are a lot of people intimidated by the machine? And you know, does it feel arguably therefore inaccessible for people?
I want them to feel intimidated, so they have to join in order to be part of the voice that influences and educates.
Yeah, I'm talking about associations, though. I'm talking about associations being intimidated by the machine.
Yeah.
They're not sure how to penetrate it. Now, Richard, you know, has had a huge amount of success, you know, lobbying, but it's not lobbying, it's relationship management. And, you know, it's exactly what you've just described. You know, it's the flow of information, the flow of support, help, dialogue. But I suggest that you're not intimidated by any of that process, because you've been part of that. You understand it and you get it. But I think a lot of associations struggle to sort of perceive where they fit within the process, how they fit, and I think some of them might be quite weary of approaching government.
I think that is true to an extent. I mean, if you think, certainly in the UK, most trade associations are on a spectrum. At one end, you've got the associations who focus solely on business support and technicalities. That's it. They hardly bother. They are hardly aware of the political. At the other end, you've got the associations who are essentially the political wing of their organisation.
Yeah.
I've tended to be sort of somewhere towards the middle in most of the ones that I am. The thing is that those associations which don't have a particularly have that much of an involvement in advocacy work, if something comes up which is going to affect their sector and their members, they may need to do that. And yes, then they might not know where's to go, and they could well be intimidated. Then it can be very difficult to find out how to do it. Going to some of the public affairs agencies, can be very hit or miss, because in the nature of agencies, they will promise that they can do lots if you give them money.
Yeah.
But I can remember, I will leave you to imagine the look on one of the managing directors of one of those agencies' faces one time when he came to me telling me that he thought he could help us on something. And I said, well, would you be prepared to pay by results rather than output? So one of the things that tends to happen is there, as somebody described it, there are sort of three sort of routes people come into associations. One is the route of just pure membership. They get involved in the membership side of things. One is from the sector that it's where you itself, where people come in having worked in the sector and then they come into the association. The other is from the policy side. So people like me who've been in the civil service in some form and then want to move on and do something a bit broader, a bit different, who see other opportunities. And so there are a lot of ex-civil servants working in trade associations. I think that's what helps. That's what helps us be more effective. I think the interesting thing is how many, particularly of your members, think that they know how government and civil service and lobbying works much better than you do. I once said that there are 3 jobs in Britain that anyone you talk to thinks they can do better than the incumbent, and that's the Prime Minister, the England football manager, and the head of lobbying and representation at their trade association.
Well, I mean, you've kind of answered the question. I was going to ask you about the distinction between an in-house government affairs staff person versus an external paid lobbyist, and if you felt there was a right time for one versus the other.
There is definitely a right time for an agency. If you haven't got anyone in-house, then that is definitely a right time. If you have got people in-house, then you go to an agency when the expertise or the access you need, you cannot
when you
get.
need to buy the relationship.
Not buy the relationship. I think it's more that because public affairs agencies usually start full of people who work for political parties. And so they may not know about the subject, but they will know the people involved, and they will be able to know how best to approach the individuals. I've always liked to think that I know what I'm doing sufficiently well that if I write a letter to a civil servant or to an MP, I will get it. I stand a pretty good chance of getting a hearing if I couch it right. Yeah, and that's and that's getting long enough to get the first foot through the door where you can get a basic hearing.
Yeah.
But sometimes you need somebody who's got more, who's working on a much wider spread, much wider level, who can bring those in. There are also other things where actually it involves a more intensive campaign, and then that's the point you bring in those that kind of expertise. There is definitely a role for public affairs agencies, and I know there are some very good ones. There are quite a few that I think talk a much better game than they play. Let's put it that way.
You know, it's interesting, and I wonder if the weight of the majority factors into this. But in my trade association history, we would leverage the members' relationships, and often the elected officials wanted to meet with the employers and meet with the company owners. They wanted to meet with the taxpayers who brought work to their districts versus a lobbyist, a policy person. How does that factor in? Are you putting your members in those hearings? Are they testifying? Are they contributing to or giving you access to their relationships, someone they went to school with or someone they grew up nearby who is now in government? How does the member piece of this fit in?
I think, and again, I would always steer away from saying you build it on the relationships, because yes, there are people I know from university or my time working in Parliament or elsewhere who have gone into elected office, but that doesn't give me any greater access to them. And actually, one of my best friends from university became an MP. I was very careful how I handled that relationship when it was professionally, because I didn't want the professional to interfere with the person. I knew at some point he wouldn't be an MP and I wouldn't be doing that job, and I still wanted him as a friend. So, but I think to go back to the key, how to use the members, you don't necessarily put the members into a position where they are talking policy to a particular, in my view, to particularly not to civil servants, but also to ministers. But sometimes you use them just to use their real life examples to illustrate the points you are making. And there's often times when a member who is working in the sector will have that much more credibility, saying exactly the same things that you would, but they will be able to add their personal perspective from their local business. The other thing that is quite useful to use membership for is just the sheer weight of numbers. In that I can talk to a civil servant, I can talk to a minister, that's me and my policy team talking to one people. I can send letters to MPs, but again, that's one letter. But if the members in that particular constituency write to their MP, if they invite them to come into their business to talk about this issue, firstly, the MP has to take more notice of that because it's a constituency, so there are votes involved. And secondly, it means that they also have a chance to engage with that business and that view much more effectively. So it's not simply about pushing the weight of numbers, but actually having that local connection, having that local insight, having that practical insight. It's a really valuable tool to deploy.
Yeah. Well, in all of these changing landscapes, and you think about regions, you think about continents, you think about countries, and the changing dynamics that are having such potentially dramatic effects on membership societies, trade associations, and the like. I mean, we can reschedule a get together, Richard, in the spring of next year and see what kind of mess we might be in here. But it's a reminder that there is a power in association. There is, by aggregating the volume of your industry, that you can have a greater impact. And this is why I came to associations, because of that opportunity it had to influence government and influence the machine. What I took away from this morning was really that reminder for everyone to go in and get involved more earlier on in the process during that ideation, because of the impact that a dramatic majority might have. What would be your big goal or piece of advice for associations going into kind of the last quarter of 2024 and preparing for 2025?
I would say, if you're thinking about trying to influence government, make sure you've looked at actually what the government policy is, the basic. So what the party policy is, what was in those policy papers for the manifesto. Make sure you know that, so you know where the people you're talking to are coming from.
Yep.
And then make sure you've got a robust evidence base to argue from. Too many people go run campaigns on the basis of, I know what I feel, I know what I think this is going to do, I'm going to go and tell the minister or whoever what's happening, and they'll try and tell them they need to do it differently. Right. You need to have the evidence, you need to have the data, the economics, the backup, so that you're not just coming in and saying, this is what I feel, but here is the weight of evidence to support my case. Yeah. And the other thing I would say is, remember, you can't not to back a politician into a corner. You always show them the way out. Don't say, here is the problem, you need to sort it out. Say, here is the problem, here is the solution that we can offer you that will help you achieve your political aim and make life better for us as an industry. And that way we all win. Yeah.
So reputation, credibility, data and research.
Absolutely.
And that balance with relationships. Well, Richard, thank you so much. I feel like we should have you back probably every 6 to 9 months. When is your next election? When is this majority going to be put to the test?
Oh,
Well, 5 years.
5 years.
4 to 5 years. So Parliament, British Parliament has to can last up to 5 full years. With a majority like this, the election is purely at the time of the Prime Minister's choosing. We did have a fixed term Parliament Act for a very short while, but the Prime Ministers got rid of that because they didn't like not having the power to choose. So it will probably happen sometime round about 2028, 2029.
Well, that feels like a long way away. A lot can happen, and I hope trade associations and membership societies kind of take their destinies into their own hands, and don't wait and presume that things are going to be peaceful or consistent. Take action, give your members voice. Richard, thank you so much for joining us, and until next time, put your members and your mission first.
Thanks.